Hi, welcome to this impromptu conversation today about retreats and the ceremonial and transformational work that's happening and the vision that we hold for the future of it. And today I'm joined by Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Hi. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Andrea is an organizational ecologist. I'd love to learn more about that. She's a Nectar guide and a collaborator, and I'm happy to say a dear friend of mine that I've known for at least a handful of years now. And by the way, I'm Pascal, the co-founder of Nectar. So, hi, Andrea. Can you tell us more about what you mean by organizational ecologist?
Yeah, so in the context of today's conversation, an organizational ecologist for me is the work I do is doing organizational development and consulting, but I like to look at and support organizations to see themselves as ecology. So not only themselves, so there's all the elements that make up the ecological system of an organization, but also that you're actually embedded in a greater ecology of the retreat center, or psychedelic space, et cetera, et cetera. So really thinking about things as interacting systems can really support coming into greater flow so we can actually see where the blockages are and how to improve things.
Beautiful. That's so much a big part of reinventing organizations and business, right? Is opening up the lens and seeing things as interconnected, which is such a big piece of psychedelic experiences that they teach us about that. And in the retreat space specifically, what I've learned over the years is that there's so many different interconnected parts that are part of the ecosystem of retreats that are often forgotten or maybe unseen. And yet so much of these things have subtle impacts or maybe not so subtle impacts on safety and transformation, and also speaking frankly the well-being of the teams and staff that are operating these things and the communities that they are part of as well. So in terms of organizational ecology, what does that mean to you then as part of a retreat context?
I think it's important that we acknowledge both the unseen and the seen elements. So just like in a psychedelic session or a ceremony, we know that there's the music, there's the person holding the space, there's different tools that are very visible that we can see how we set up the lighting, etc. Blankets. But there's also the unseen elements. There's energies moving. There's how the music works in the space. There's the dynamic or tensions that might exist between people. There's even the fact that sometimes in a group space, which some of us may have experienced, you actually end up having a very similar experience or sensation or vision as somebody else in the room. And how did that happen? And so if we can actually take that learning and say, okay, how is this organization, how is this system of the whole bigger process of what it takes to operate this, how is that working the same way? How are there seen and unseen things that are impacting each other, including the history, the original purpose of the business, the founder's intentions, all the way to how are we thinking about money and the energetics of money? How is that impacting us? What's going on with different structural things, like even like the relationship to the land that we're working in. So all of those elements, when we include them and we start to see them in that way, something else can happen. It's much different than just trying to pinpoint the problem as a cause solution kind of examination, to actually broadening the lens to see, oh yeah, but if we do that over there, then this happens over there, and we can't, it's not always linear. And so really it's about broadening that focus, broadening that perspective, so that we can have more life, more love, vitality flowing through the entire system, which hopefully means, just better lives for everyone that's involved, including the natural environment.
Exactly. And that's, I think, one of the points we want to talk about today. Through these, we have a very short presentation to show you, but that the little parts really impact the greater impact, and especially people who attend those retreats and the staff that are part of this ecosystem. A lot of it is shouldered by those groups of people and the land and the community they live in. And we're at a very poignant time in the space right now. Like, 4 years ago, people were investing in left, right, center in retreats and things and millions of dollars. And people were booking retreats as well a ton of times. And there was less competition as well. But nowadays, there's so many different retreats. I think the market has grown in some ways. There's more people interested, but also the pie is getting divided in a lot more different ways. And what I'm hearing from retreat founders and teams is that there's a lot of challenges in this space. We're going to be speaking about all of that today's part. Okay, so as we discussed, retreats are a complex web of interconnected relationships. These are things I've been percolating on, that Nectar has been percolating on for quite a while now, and we're missing some. I'm sure there's many others. And what we want to communicate with this illustration is that the subtle and not so subtle field gets impacted by every element. So as you mentioned earlier, at the top we have founders, and I actually put investors at the top of the pyramid, just because the money part in terms of investors can often supersede even the founders, and so that's why I put it there. And I like to imagine retreat ecosystem as a pyramid where those two elements really flow down from top to bottom. And at the bottom, you'll see here the journeyer is the one that's supporting and being affected by all of these different elements, which I'll go through briefly. Um, the top investors and founders, like I mentioned, the vision, what kind of vision are they holding? What kind of structure is behind the organization? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a for-profit, etc.? What's the business structure? How are things being handled from a business perspective? What's their ethics? What's their values? That inspires culture. What's their connection to the spiritual realms or guides or allies, whatever you want to call it? How's their connection to the land and the space, the community they operate in, protocols, screening, guest experience, the list goes on and on. And all of that is shouldered and expressed through the staff and facilitators. So there's a lot of moving pieces here and a lot of things that are often forgotten or maybe become a blind side because the traditional business incentives and business vision is so often focused on generating income. And yet, all of these things affect the whole rest of the field. So it's a pretty large map. You navigate this sort of ecosystem in a good way.
When I look at this, I look at the journeyer and I think of almost that this is the room they're walking into when they interact with you and your retreat or retreat center. And what they're walking into is a culture that's been set up that is actually impacted by all these different things. So there's actually a resonance to it, so that everything that's happening actually impacts the journey experience, whether or not it's overt. And so, I have sometimes frame things as the beneficiaries, like who are the beneficiaries of your system, of what you're trying to create. And that could be the journeyer, but it also could be, the people that get an income, could be the local region, all of these kinds of elements. So really thinking about that. So approaching something like this, it's really about looking at what we can see and we can't see, but also the tensions in each area. We know that what we resist persists. So it's like, where's the area? And so I actually work with people with a lot of mapping. And so after a conversation, we would maybe look at like, okay, where are the hot points in this map, in your ecosystem? We might just take a few of them and be like, okay, what is the dynamic of interplay? And it could be that certain of these elements are more kind of systemically entangled. There's something that's holding them back. And so I think, doing maps with teams and with organizations where you actually look at, this kind of ideal model. And then we could do the what is. Can we actually look at what's actually happening? And if we had people intuitively place these elements in a map, or even maybe 5 of them, where they actually fall would tell us a lot. So it could be that that there's some elements that are needing more attention, needing to see, okay, what's actually going on here. One of my systemic constellations, which is a practice I facilitate, it's also a philosophy. She talks about a baby mobile. Right. So it's like when you have a baby mobile, there's no linearity to it. You touch something over here and then the entire thing starts moving and shifting. So when we think about interventions, but okay, where should we make changes? Even just holding in perspective that a change to, I don't know, the protocols or the screening might have a lot of other impacts. So, and we that's very clear. It might make a difference on how long we need to spend with the person before they arrive. It might be require team training. But if the protocol misses something and is trying to hide or not acknowledge something, that's going to pop up somewhere else. And so it's really about seeking any kind of support we can have to have a broader perspective. And that's where I think that we need outside help. We need help seeing the water that we're swimming in from a new perspective. And so, it's why I'm such a big fan of Nectara, and what Nectara is up to is that it's like, can we actually have a different perspective that helps us not only understand some of what's happening here, but also we might get to hear about different models that are working somewhere else. And so, as
Mm.
we evolve in the way we can actually operate as teams, organizations, retreat centers, the broader space, we're kind of reaching into the future for ways of doing things that don't exist yet. So why not, be in touch with other people to see, okay, actually, this protocol seems to be working really well over here. Well, let's see. What would that look like if we implemented here? What might be effective? So yeah, I guess for me, it's like, can we take the bird's eye view? And how do
Yeah.
we get help doing that?
I love the mobile example and so much of like how I've related to my own personal journey of healing. And I think, um, this idea of paying attention to one thing and then everything else shifts and it's non-linear. Yet I think in the business world, it's a natural thing to kind of look in silos and like, oh, my marketing or my protocols are like not delivering what I'm hoping to do, but forgetting that these other parts are going to get really influenced by these things. And when we talk about this idea of such a nuanced ecosystem, it's not about perfection. It's not about getting it all right and that it's always going to be sort of at some point finalized. Is sort of like integration. It's never quite finished. That these things are organic and they're going to keep shifting together as things change organically. So it's not about perfection, but it's about attuning and paying attention to what these things mean. And it's a beautiful exercise, I think, to enrich our perspective of our own organization as a living interconnected thing like this, because it surfaces a lot of gifts and insights.
There's a great teacher I worked with in England. His name is Mac McCartney, and he's brought forward a teaching that I believe is from a North American Indigenous context that he just calls it the twin trail. And there's also a twin trail. So this is one of the trails. It's like, okay, what does the organization look like? What do I need to do in the leadership role? What do I need to be paying attention to? The other trail is the internal. And so I think, the self-development or support sensing into what's actually happening with the people that are leading these projects actually has a big impact outside. So I would say there's this kind of dual piece to pay attention to, especially in the founders and leadership, whatever is happening inside. One sometimes is a huge indicator of what's happening in the system. So for me, systemic or leadership means that sometimes we're tuning into something and we have the ability to be like, this is mine. And I think I'm sensing something else that's going on here with the whole system. And when we name it into the system, with a team or something, often when it's really true, the team will relax. So it's
Mm,
really, there's this piece of being able to notice that sometimes what we're picking up on is actually systemic information. It's not just about what we're feeling. And sometimes you even just name that into a team meeting and everyone's like, oh my God, I've been feeling that too. It's like, oh, okay, it's not just me. Oh, is anyone ever had that experience? It's like, actually, that means it's something systemic. The other key to think something that's systemic as well that I think is a good indicator to take a broader look is patterns. If things are repeating, you've got a systemic issue, something that's going to ask you to look through the baby mobile lens of what's going on here, because patterns don't come from nowhere and they're often
yeah.
below the surface. So there's a couple of tips of how to see things differently.
Yeah, and for the journeyer, it's the same thing, right? Like when they enter this space, as you call it earlier, this room that is held by the staff and the investors and founders and community and the medicines as well. They feel something, and sometimes it's not about what they're receiving in terms of communication or protocol or whatever. It's a felt sense of harmonic resonance or of alignment with a heart frequency, whatever way you want to phrase that. They feel like it's right and it's authentic and it's resonant across the entire experience. Like when you think about some of my favorite retreats or spaces I've been in, like my nervous system was completely relaxed and I was able to really feel and lean into it because it could hold me in a way that felt safe. And what we want people to get out of this illustration is that all these little things end up impacting that experience that people have in the space itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So retreat teams can tap into this knowledge and this wisdom that's present. But let's talk about the challenges and things that I've been hearing and we've been hearing at Nectar with retreat teams for the last 4 years, which are common challenges that almost all of them are facing in some way or another. And it's not to say that all of them are listed here, but let's look at some of the challenges that people have. And some of those challenges oftentimes lead to overwhelm, team, lack of team alignment, and can lead to all sorts of different issues of client safety, cutting corners in budgets, cutting corners in operations, or not having the right support systems in place, and all sorts of different things. So in unordered list, I'll go through some of the most common ones I've heard. Misaligned founder intentions, and we put that at the top of the pyramid because it's such a big element of what goes on to the pyramid. Is why did you start this retreat space? What's your intention with it? What do you want to get out of it? Why do you do this work? And what is your own, like you said, internal ecosystem in terms of your own healing journey? And what are you putting out into the world? So that's pretty important for me as someone who works with retreats. Is what are their founders' intentions?
Well, as a founder, you're a
As a
founder,
founder,
right?
yeah, because I've
It's
seen the
interesting.
pitfalls of that too, right? Like I think
Exactly.
it's a our work is a reflection of our own inner path. So like I've learned a lot from that with Nectara.
And there's this piece too, there's we could say intentions or stated purpose. So sometimes, the purpose we start with or the purpose we put on the website or the brochure isn't aligned with the actual purpose of what's going on. And so I had an example of this the other day where someone was like, oh, well, kind of the purpose of this business was that I needed to create myself a job that was different than the other jobs. And I was like, okay, well, as an organizational purpose, it's not really aligned, not with what's on your website, which is like, I'm here to XXX. And so sometimes even just looking from disalignment and for what you're saying the purpose is and what's actually happening. And so you'd almost have for most of these kind of two columns, like what we state and what's actually happening. And just looking there at the dissonance between the two can surface which one of these elements is the key to look at. Because it
Mm-hmm.
leads to burnout and overwhelm when they're not aligned, which is number
That
two.
it's such a common one, honestly. Like
Yeah.
I speak to a lot of people at retreats who are overwhelmed and burnt out in some way or another. Either it's the support staff or just the leadership itself from having to navigate such a complex and nuanced area and still navigating. And that's another piece of the puzzle here somewhere, merging sacred work with money. That's a whole different difficult topic of like, how do I make money in this space, and how do I charge for things, and how do I manage these beautiful sacred experiences, and also meet my financial needs in this 3D world. That's a very common issue. And of course, gaps in client care and support is a huge one, and that's the reason why we started Nectar in the first place, that we saw the huge gap in client care. And you know to us, like, honoring the teachings of this medicine takes an equally related reverence in terms of client care, because otherwise, why are you doing this? Like, if you're sending people home dysregulated or without support or without long tail ongoing support, I think you're doing a disservice to the community, and you're actually not. And that goes back to the founder intentions. You're not truly leading to transformation in your clients. And I say this, of course, from a Western retreat perspective, not so much indigenous ones, but I now want to name that as well. There's a lot of really big challenges in this space that are directly impacting the transformation that's happening in the space.
That when folks, if people are leaving and there hasn't been the care, it actually resonates back into the ecosystem, even if you've never seen them again. That's part of the unseen piece, right? So it's, and it's such a stretch, because at what point does aftercare end? Because of course, people need also self-responsibility. They need to be empowered to tap into their own resources of support in their own home community, especially if people are going somewhere where they don't live. So I think there's that, if we built it out even further, there's also about how do we, and I think that's the other piece that Nectar is doing, is offering the journeyers another element of support, because of course retreat centers can't do it all in a world where we all need a lot of support and resourcing. So it's a tricky piece of where does our work start and where does it end? And sometimes naming it, okay, we can provide aftercare and access, as part of the program for this many months. After that, here's your other options, and actually just making it above board rather than not naming it at all. And we know people need many more elements in their healing journeys than just what we can offer. But things like community, connection, additional kind of spaces to talk about it. Well, organizations like Nectar or the retreat centers themselves through even a WhatsApp group can help provide that. So it's really just being pretty honest about what you can and can't do, but also what's needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that ties into the business model element, that reward quantity over quality. And if you've paid attention to some of the businesses in the clinical space in the last 4 years, they were really going for a model of an in and out model of people coming into retreat over and over again, or clinical sessions over and over again, and going for volume of clinics and things of that nature, but not paying enough attention to quality and so much and the transformation that actually happens. And I think that's I think a flip that we're going to see in the space is, instead of having a lot of retreats that do a lot of high volume care and experiences, we're going to see it much smaller retreats doing much smaller amounts of client experiences and providing great care and great intentions and really paying attention to their ecosystem. And I think that's a big part of doing this work from an ecosystem perspective, is that slow is and small is often better than big and fast. And that means giving yourself and your staff enough time for rest, for training, for all these type of slower things that actually benefit things on a slower timeline than just making more money. And I think that's a big shift in the space of smaller is better.
Absolutely. I think we're evolving. And I think it's pretty normal for any new system to try to kind of match what existed before, right? So we get to match other therapeutic processes, or we try to match other medical, or even ceremonial, like trying to model like a church. But it's like these are actually evolving, and so maybe starting and I'm being like, okay, what actually doesn't work from that old model? How can we invite in a new model and see that we're actually inventing the future right now? We are if we can be really open to what you were saying before, is it's never going to be perfect because it's evolving, and seeing part of why you're here is to actually create a different way of doing things, a different kind of organization, a different kind of business. When that's conscious in what you're doing, you actually create some space for it. And then there's a possibility of being like, okay, in 20 years, we want this to look different. We're going to be a part of that evolution, even if it's just really slow and really simple, because we've got a lot of things to do. But that's a key part of what we're all doing here, I think, the
Yeah,
opportunity.
absolutely. And it's not about waving a stick at folks and being like, oh, you're not doing it well. It's more about trying to figure out together what it means to do this work well. And our common friend Trevor Miller had a great analogy for the psychedelic space years ago, and it stuck with me, which was, we're trying to build a spaceship while it's flying in the air. And so a lot of this for us is observations, ideas, some things to contemplate and reflect, but there's no one way of doing this, and there's no sort of one framework to operate with. However, having the intention of paying attention, getting curious, like you said, about these different things can lead to a lot of richness, especially when you're getting external perspectives on these things, which, as founders, I know we can get tunnel vision. And even on myself, I always ask for outsider people to come and help and give me some new perspectives. Is there one last challenge in here that feels especially juicy for you? Maybe the ethical side. I mean, we can, there's a lot of good ones here.
I think, I've actually named something around lineage, it's connection to the land, looking at how the business models evolve, is actually to not forget about time. And the timeline of how are things happening, and actually spending some time with your team to actually look at the evolution of time, what happened in the past, including it all. Because I think for a lot of these things, it's really important to get that time-based perspective of what happened before, especially if there's been like an organizational trauma that's happened, taking time away from it, but coming back and always looking back and including and see what you could learn. when a bit of time has passed, sometimes we speed up so fast that we don't take time to actually go back and, well, that's the past that happened before. But I think with
Mm,
all of these, actually putting them in a timeline context and taking the time to look at how things have evolved actually can provide huge insights on why these challenges might be reappearing, which ones are connected, when they started. Because sometimes some of the pieces started, and you might see that there's a pattern inside. But you also, something around financial. We know that people maybe don't have as much, or we think, or we're hearing that they don't have the kind of disposable income right now. And so, looking at things within a timed context can also be really.
absolutely. And we've done the same thing with Nectar as well. Me and Elaine have been building for 4 years. And at some point, we're like, you know what? We need to look back a little bit. And so we work with you actually to do constellations process with our team. And that was really helpful to help refine and clarify vision, also team alignments and dynamics that were present. And so, yeah, thanks for naming that. It's something that we should add to the list as well, is the team alignment and yeah, the time to take and reflect and learn from these challenges and move forward in a good way. So what does moving forward look like? What are ways that we think are can help nourish retreats around these challenges? We've put together a small list of things that we've been thinking about, being first one on the top, evolutionary purpose beyond capital. And I know that a lot of people in this space are operating already from that space of, you know, helping the planet heal and ecosystems thrive and people transform. A lot of that is present in the space. And yet, I think the second point, business itself kind of contradicts that sometimes, and that makes it quite difficult for some founders and teams to step into evolutionary purpose in a more embodied and widespread way. Can you talk a little bit about that tension between sort of the angel world a little bit, not the angel
Yeah.
as venture capitalist, but the spiritual purpose world of retreats and navigating the business side of things, which is very rooted in a lot of tensions for people.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting ones about the space that we're talking about is that often it's motivated by something that's bigger, or most of them are, and I think we sometimes see that some of the businesses or retreat centers that we might have more critiques of tend to be capital driven rather than really thinking about the whole picture. So I think spending time around purpose is really important, and looking also at how I think one of the new ways of working is actually including the team, including everyone involved in their wholeness, and also looking to align their personal purpose with that of the organization. So it's like, why are they here? And when we actually spend time doing alignment between purpose, so the personal purpose of the people on the team, it's quite nourishing for the team. And then also, can connect in with the organizational purpose. And then I think we just really need to get, all of us, so there's so much unpacking, so much work to do around money. That
Mm,
abundance, and how we generate money, how we feel about money, how we do or don't talk about it can actually really impact the business, can impact how the teams are feeling. So exchange, fair exchange, right relationship are things that really matter to a systemic perspective. Like if we think like an ecosystem, there's always exchange happening. There's never perfect balance.
mm,
There's water coming in, et cetera. And so actually even mapping that out is like, what is the flow of energy and exchange in the system? And when we prioritize money over exchange, that feels right. That's in right relationship, things will get out of balance. So when you're quote unquote cutting corners, or people aren't, say the local staff from the local place aren't getting paid in the same way as
mm.
foreigners, et cetera, or et cetera. Things like this can actually throw the system out of balance. So it's many more spinning wheels than just like, you can't just be all about money. I think it's much more complex than that. It's about, what are you here to actually do? And I think one of the opportunities for this new time is like, can we actually look at exchange differently in organizations, that we're always tuning into what's in balance and what isn't? And when you tune into that, some of those other issues, they don't come up as big.
That's right. Yeah, I put those at the top because it's been one of the most prevalent challenges that I've heard from retreat teams is money and financial things. And things in that nature, which is hard to ignore when you're working in this world. And so I think that that balance, like you said, that exchange, that flow, and being harmonious, it is a big impact over everything else. Which, as you go through the list, integration support is a big one that has been the reason why we created Nectar, was to help fix the client care gap, which is an issue primarily because of money, because of time and energy, because of staffing, because of operations. All those things are often not developed or mature enough to really support the kind of care that people are looking for and need to really truly make transformation happen in their life. So that's a pretty common one that I see as an evolution of the retreats model, which is going to be a lot more focused on client care. And I also see integration centers popping up. We just partnered with Posada Natura in Costa Rica, which are offering
Yeah.
land-based integration to support
Yeah.
other retreats to support their clients as they land in Costa Rica. So I see a lot more of that happening to help support people from all walks of life to support their work.
I think you just put your finger on something we haven't talked about yet, partnering and collaborating. It's when we think that everyone else is competition, then we
Right.
take on a worldview that it's about competition. And this whole survival of the fittest, we're debunking that. It's like the survival of the collaborators. So it's like, what are other folks doing really well that you can use help with? And doing, really finding what you do well, and sharing, and being in conversations, not just operating like lone wolves, not thinking that every other center is a competitor, that there can be spaces of shared learning, spaces of dialogue. And of course, people have their own ways. And especially within, I think, medicine spaces, people have really strong opinions about the right way to work with medicine. And
Mhm.
that's one thing, but it's also, it's like, what do we do really well? And what do others do well? And so actually looking at, cooperation, collaboration, sharing of resources, and moving away from thinking that everything is scarce, I
Mm,
think is key. So it's like, where can you collaborate, and what's there to learn from collaborations? I think is
absolutely.
really important.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's the driving ethos behind Nectar is about co-creation, collaboration, because the space, spoiler alert, is not rich enough and large and big enough yet to support a bunch of different large organizations that are, generating tons of income to invest in all the things that need to happen to hold this kind of work well. And so I see the future being about centralized hubs like Nectar, and it could be many other ones like this that support a decentralized network of hundreds of different retreats to support them in ways that you don't have to recreate the wheel over and over and over again, but rather how can you, like you said, leverage what's happening really well in some areas and combine these things with your skills, with your resources, with your team, to create something
Exactly.
that's beyond what your capacity actually is. And when you do that, and I've heard this many times from people who came from organizations like Synthesis, for example, that were super well funded and they were scaling and all that stuff. And now they're actually working on a much smaller retreat. Like Miles at Confluence Retreats has shared his story with me. He's just doing one retreat every month and it's small, and he has like 3 weeks in between retreats, and he's feeling way better about the work, but also his own nervous system. And the fact that he just needs a very small staff because he's partnering with us to support his
Right.
experiences. And so I see that really as the future of doing retreat work well.
Yeah, I love it. It's really it again, tapping into the richness of ecosystem thinking. There's only scarcity when we really start to create it. And yeah, what do you do really well that you could help me with? Some of it's like the operational and technical support, um, booking systems. What can we share so that other people, so we don't have to think about it, so we can focus on what we love to do.
Exactly. And so much of people in this space love to do transformational work, right? And so a lot of retreat teams are holding tons and tons of different facets of things that they don't really like, honestly, and that they end up compromising or stitching. We did a survey recently about retreat teams and how many systems they use. And I think on average, it was like they use 20 different platforms to manage different things, or and I think 80-90% of people were really disgruntled with their technology solutions to what they're doing. So there's all these things that spill, into the space around frustration or lack of alignment that end up impacting the whole sphere. And finally, just as a last a last piece of about potential solutions and ideas, is ethics at the core of the business. I think that's um, people kind of often speed up and try to create things, but then like what's actually guiding the whole offering oftentimes is not actually put on paper around ethics and around the importance of how do we steward this ecosystem in a good way, what really is important to us, how are we going to do this work, oftentimes is as important as what we're actually doing in this work. So I think having a strong ethical foundation and putting ethics at the core of every decision we make first is a really good way to improve the retreat ecosystem.
I think writing things down, to taking the time of to slow down to speed up, it really is a good a good phrase for organizations, is actually document if you can, and pay attention to integrity. Again, to come back to what we spoke about earlier, when things are out of alignment, your the people who are coming to the retreat center, they subtly feel it. So it's not it doesn't serve their healing journey, but also nothing gets unnoticed in that kind of space, So really, yeah, taking the time to spend really looking at where you could be in greater integrity, how you can find alignment, which really often is this learning to communicate, slow down to talk about things, name things, and, be a part of conversations so we can actually ask for help from others. And I can't really figure this out, so I love, even, these peer spaces, like where, especially solo facilitators, getting to be in a space where you can actually tune in with some other facilitators of what's actually happening for them, or access some ethics training or other things, especially when you're working on your own, I think is critical. We need to feel a part of something. That's where accountability and learning is.
Absolutely. And so much of that rewiring around better ecosystems is about asking for help. And I think a lot of us resist that because we want to figure it out. We don't know where to go, etc. And so Nectar has evolved since the beginning of its creation over 4 years ago. I can't believe it's been over 4 years ago. And when we started this, we were really focused on supporting our friends who are all facilitators around these sort of issues that we were hearing about all the time. But over time, we've shifted more and more towards organizational support because of the challenges we've seen. And so we've created different things that we can help retreat spaces and have been helping retreat spaces with for the last few years. One of them being the Care platform, which offers seamless and integrated client care and support. And it's all about helping retreat teams shoulder their experience in a much more supportive, connected, and seamless way so that people can really get the support they need, not just over a week or two or have an integration circle before or after. It's about giving them a care space and a community of support that is integrated within the retreat experience itself, and that is co-created with the retreat space itself, so that uh, those unique needs and communities are met with continuity of care and alignment with the original experience they've had. So that's been really supportive for our partners. We also offer mentorship, which is around ongoing support to skill up staff. And you're part of that team that offers mentorship, and also team experiences and alignment workshops as well with constellations. I can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's such an opportunity to have some outside perspective to facilitate a process to actually find out what it's basically a different approach to problem solving that I can offer, and supporting teams to actually have an experience. So I find that, the space that I can hold is it's kind of like a ceremony. Something can actually shift really quickly when we have facilitation support, or we have some perspective on different things to look at in organizations. So how do we actually, what can we look to And so I think, the space and just even watching the different mentorship opportunities that are available in Nectar, and there's the high quality that folks don't need to actually spend their time looking around for someone who can help, that there's actually such a rich group available, for mentorship and different kinds of care within Nectara. I think knowing where to refer people to, I think it's really important. So yeah, I would love personally more opportunity to work directly with teams, because I think, we can actually unlock things quite quickly when we have a bit of external support to see what we're not seeing. It's often that. It's like, what am I not seeing? Why is this pattern repeating? Or what technology can help us? Pascal, help me. I think really it's so great that there's this resource that people can look to figure out, to even know what kind of help that they need to figure that out.
Yes, and that diversity of expertise, I think, is really important. It's the same with integration. It's about offering a buffet of options so that people can find themselves to what really connects with them. And it's likewise the same for the consulting part. Is if you need help with operations or technology or intake and screening, reviewing those things, or your trauma informed care, like what does that look like? What can you improve on that? Or even marketing in some cases. That's a pretty big one for a lot of retreats. Like, how are you doing your marketing? How are you doing your pricing and reciprocity and accessibility, or your ethics? How are you stewarding the ship? Those are all things that really benefit from outside perspectives, and it saves you lots of money because you don't have to hire a whole team to do that on a full-time basis. So I think it makes all of this really accessible as well. And lastly, collaboration. But it's really about expanding what's possible and working together so that we can reach our goals and our purpose in a much more supportive and effective way.
Yeah, I think, the community aspect to healing, evolution, to expanding what's possible for organizations, for individuals, it actually just, it's all relational. We know that. And so, the opportunity to have actually connections with others, it's at the heart. It's absolutely at the heart. That's how ecosystems work. If we think about ecosystems and how to think about organizations, it really is all about collaboration.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much for walking through this impromptu, sort of improvised mini workshop, I guess you could call it. But I think I hope it illustrated some of our thinking around retreats and what we see in the field. And as always, we're always listening to what people are sharing and what can be useful for them and how we can serve the space. But do you have any closing, inspiring thoughts to retreat teams out there?
For me, I feel really energized by this conversation. I'm a bit of an organization nerd, but I think that there's so much potential, so how do we unblock and create greater flow? It's just really just taking the time to look at things, reaching out to support, and not to underestimate how little things are impacting each other. And again, paying attention to both the unseen and seen, and really trusting that inner knowing and developing that. I think that's all really important part of leadership within the space. And yeah, really, really pleased to have this conversation to dive even further into the Nectara approach, which it's been really beautiful to watch slowly evolve according to the needs of the community. And I think that's a great sign of an organization, is when you're actually evolving to what does the community need from us, and stepping into that. So just a super high five for the
Super
work.
high five. Yeah, and if you're a retreat team or part of a team or a founder, we created Nectar for people like you, and we see you, we see the great work you're doing. And if you ever need support on anything, we're here to help you and figure these things out together. All right. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much. Have a good day and be well.